It's my pleasure this morning to introduce Jeff Jackson. And as it says on the slide, which is kind of, and we've got the information in the brochure, but Jeff is a professor and the coordinator of the Outdoor Adventure Program at Algonquin College in Ontario, Canada. Jeff also is a co-author of a book titled Managing Risk, Systems Planning, where'd it go here? Systems Planning for Outdoor Adventure Programs, which is really an in-depth book for managing risk and running outdoor programs, which I think is an excellent book, so I recommend it highly. Jeff was also a NOLS instructor, and he came to NOLS in 1995. He took a professional instructor's course. We actually called it a summer instructor's seminar at that time. He had a lot of experience coming to NOLS as an instructor for Outward Bound Canada, as well as a guide in Canada. He went on to work as a field instructor from 1996 to 2000. He worked predominantly in the river program, but I know one time he traded his paddle for reins and worked the horse course, so that's cool. One comment from one of his co-workers on an I of I eval from way back when was, Jeff brought non-NOLS experience to the course in a manner that complemented our curriculum. And that sort of sums up a lot of the reasons why we invited Jeff to be here. He's got so much experience and he has a great ability to transcend the boundaries of different organizations. Jeff also has been a speaker at the Wilderness Risk Management Conference that we hold every year. He's been doing that for quite a while. And he's become one of our favorite speakers. He's well received there. And to give him another quote from last year, someone wrote, "This workshop was worth the price of admission for the whole conference. A paradigm shift for me and beautifully presented." So with that, my pleasure to introduce Jeff Jackson.
Of Drew like going up to the attic and like blowing off my file folder. Great, thanks. I'm pleased to be here, and thanks very much for having me. Is this okay without a mic? I like to move around, so I prefer not to be stuck to a mic. So let's see. So someone quote something along the lines of bring non-NOLS content, something along those lines. Really, I can kind of find holes no matter where I am and complain about them. So kind of a critical theorist is the good word. Another one is that can just kind of always see things that don't look right and ask why does it have to work that way. So really, that's kind of my proposition that I bring to this presentation, which is talking about an alternative means around skills progression. And I think that this has a larger implication in stories that the story can kind of continue in some different directions, but I'm going to kind of follow down one path here. So there's a couple ideas that I want to put on your plate as important and probably more important than some other things that we prioritize around. Schema and sense making, it's the same idea. Very important things, two interesting pieces that are tied to a whole bunch of other intriguing avenues of thought, of research, but also application for us. So I'm going to start there. I'm going to spend some time on how that plays into a system of motivated behavior. So my own background as a college professor, I teach in a guide training diploma program in a community college, a business diploma setting. But I'm also nearing the end of a Ph.D., and that is around safety motivation. So motivation itself is my field of study, and specifically how people choose to perform safely. So I'm going to give you a very simple model around that to place schemas and sense making to drive the importance of that. And then I'm going to propose a model of training which emphasizes those things, and through my, let's see, 13 or 14 years of really action research, I'd say, in my college program, the guide training program that I run and teach in, we do things a little differently, and it wasn't by purpose originally. Kind of just flew out of my own philosophies, and since then it's become something a little more structured, a little more modeled, and as it turns out is totally grounded in science that exists in industrial as well as social psychology. So I'm going to tie all these things together and provide a different perspective on the things that you do, the things that we're doing all the time. So here's the bottom line. if we want to train people quickly to get up to competence, there's going to be some shortcuts. We can't do everything. So we can't make somebody good quickly. We can do some things to help them get good quicker, but it's all about trade-offs. So I'm going to kind of propose why there's maybe some shortcuts are more valuable than others. Other bottom line, the accelerated training, if we're going to drive folks to competency quicker, we're going to focus on sense-making, we're going to focus on non-normal, we're going to focus on failures. That's where this whole thing ends up. It is non-normal, based around sense-making, and how failure plays a role in that. And then lastly, I'm going to frame this in a conversation and tie this around training people for safe failure rather than creating systems that are fail-safe. And there's a fundamental difference in approach on those two things. So we'll get to all of those. So here's a planted question. So do you teach decision making at Knowles? So the real more fundamental question is how do you do that? So give me the kind of model. I don't know, do you all do it the same way? Or since whatever it was, since 1999 when I taught a Knowles course, there was a model that I could approach teaching decision making with. But can somebody give me in 1 or 2 sentences what's the approach to teaching decision making?
Giving them decisions to make.
All right, okay. Okay, great. So, and I'd say that's kind of a metered challenge, right? It's like you kind of give them some room to make certain decisions.
I'd say there's a basic class on decision-making styles that has 2 axes. One is basically group ownership, and the other is basically time to make a decision.
Okay. Okay, good. So therefore, there's just different decision-making strategies. Is that so you're pulling out there? You're giving people different alternatives?
Yeah, a class on sort of how the style they can choose to make decisions with.
Yeah. Sure. That's kind of the way I would have done it. Yeah, John?
Yeah, I would say that we have the habit of teaching people to make decisions by taking different alternatives and having a list of factors where they can compare them and then just eventually choose one to try first.
Excellent. Great. So we are teaching, globally, we're all teaching cognitive decision making. So we know it doesn't work. So it does work in certain circumstances, but here's what science is telling us. Social psychology, developmental psychology, neuropsychology is telling us that the broad majority of things that we decide happen long before we can ever put a word on it and we can weigh pros and cons, all the cognitive stuff. So if an iceberg is a model around that, here's what's happening. There's a whole bunch of stuff firing in our brain, really setting up, and some people would argue, the more critical people around decision making would say, anything that we do from cognitive decision making is just rationalizing what we already decided somewhere else deep in our mind. Certainly in a crisis situation, and I'm going to kind of keep crisis in a broader sense, in a non-normal situation, I think that the science is pretty clear that cognitively whatever we do has already been settled a long time ago, and I want to frame that, and therefore, my focus, and what I'm pitching to you is that we want to work on building ability here, unconscious decision making, because we can teach conscious decision making, but it's got a very, very specific place and very specific time, and it's got limited application as it turns out. So there's a bunch going on inside our brains, invisible to us, unconscious decision making, a whole big world out there. If you go pursuing the kind of science-based, the kind of science, you can find all sorts of research around that. What's going on in this picture? Do you recognize this picture? Yeah, not this exact picture, but do you have a picture like this? Yeah, of course you do. We all do. But I can tell you this actually from the Hess River in the Yukon. This is the first time we did a Knowles trip down the Hess in the Yukon. You all got a photograph like that. What about this one? Do you have that photograph? No.
Yeah.
Maybe yes or maybe no, but you all know what's going on there. Right? What's going on in this picture?
Taking a break.
Okay, so yeah, of course we're canoeing. Yes, thank you. But what's going on at this stage in a Knowles course? Knowles semester, as it turns out. What's going on in a stage of the on the Rio Grande Southwest? What can you see here? What do you read? What's that?
Kind of so.
All right, there's a group decision being made here. Yeah, great. Functional or not? Yeah, not such a functional decision. Isn't that interesting? We can look at a picture and we can kind of pull out some threads about what's going on with this group of people. This is like 15 years ago, or I don't know, 12 years ago, this photo was taken, but we've all got a similar one. Some of them were taken last year, and some of them were taken 25 years ago, but we've all got a similar photo to this. We can read the cues that are present in this photo and turn them into something else. That's an example of what's buried in our brain and what we use when we make decisions. What about this photo? A little different. Not totally different. What's going on? What stage in a course is this?
The end.
Yeah, this is the end. Is this a Knowles course?
Could be.
Oh, yeah, is this interesting? And no, you know what? We don't wear yellow rain pants at Knowles. But we still recognize this is an outer bound group. They wear yellow rain pants. As it turns out, we can still frame this and we can still categorize it. We know how to explain this, even though it's a little bit different. Well, my wife teaches she teaches anywhere. She did kindergarten for a long time. She's now graduated to grade 1, so she's counted over 30, so they let her into grade 1 now. She teaches schema in grade 1. That's pretty cool. Here we are at a professional development session, and we don't even really talk about schema when it comes to decision making. So this is on her door. I took a picture of it. It's stapled on her door. Schema, using what I already know to help me understand new information. And yes, they're using that language in grade 1, which is pretty cool. So what schema is about is anchoring something new to anchoring it to what we already know. Right? So here's some new cues. I anchor this to what I already know. So more specifically, and let's say more from a psychology and learning standpoint, so schemas are templates, schemas are categories. It's where we put information. So we receive ambiguous cues, we're not sure what to do with them, we collect them together and we find the best category for them to fit in. These categories are schemas, right? So these are classes of cues. So if you imagine an old-fashioned post office with a wall full of mail slots, and all those slots are how we categorize things. Those are our schema. And we want to have as many of those schema as we can, so we have different ways to organize information and understand them. So in grade 1, they're just, at a very basic level, categorizing information. But for us at this level, we've got thousands of mailboxes, and we've categorized our history and the things that now come in, like a photo of an outward bound group. It's like, oh yeah, I got a category for that, and I can slot it in there and use it. Those are schema. So, the important idea are these mailboxes, because we can actually build mailboxes, build these categories, and I would argue this is our prime directive when it comes to teaching people. If we're going to build their competence from a leadership standpoint, we want to give them as many mailboxes as possible, give them as many categories, broaden their schema as best we can. So it's not one schema that gets big, it's many schema, right? We want to have lots and lots of these things. Have you seen this image before? It's the most classic psychological image there is, I believe. So what do you see when you look at this image? You'll see one of two things. What do you see?
The young woman.
Old lady.
Okay, so some people see an old lady. How many people see an old lady? The first thing they see is an old lady. Okay, great. Does anybody not see an old lady here? Yeah. Totally cool. For you folks, what do you see?
A young
A
lady.
young lady. Does anybody not see the young lady here? Okay. Isn't this interesting? So we take these ambiguous cues, which are just kind of like a smeary photo, and we kind of find the best category for it, and we call it something. So some people call this an old lady, which would be 2 eyes, a nose, a mouth, and a chin, wearing like a fur coat, looking down her chest. So that could be an old lady. That would be one way to categorize this image. Or the other one could be a young woman with her hair, her ear, her eyelashes, and her nose, and her chin line looking back over her shoulder. It's another way to categorize the same image. The first time you see it, you tend to jump on one. That's unconscious decision making. You looked at the cues, you categorized it, you called it what it was. Interestingly, sometimes it's very hard to get out of that category and see the other one right next door to it. That's what we talk about. Our cognitive decision making is rationalizing our unconscious decision that's already been made. We look at this and explain it, trying to really explain what category we've put this in, what we've already decided about it. So, we have multiple schema. We can take ambiguous cues and put them wherever we want. We don't get to decide cognitively. Internally, we decide where these things go. What's going on in this photo? Ambiguous cues. You're going to hear me say this a bunch of times. This photo has ambiguous cues. What's going on in this photo? How might you categorize this photo?
Chit chat.
Yeah? Yeah, there's conversation, okay?
Good news.
Good news, yeah, I think probably we could all categorize body language as probably good news. What else maybe is confounding that one? I heard somebody saying arms crossed.
Yeah, she's closed.
Yeah.
It's closed. Patronizing on them.
Great, so that's saying good news, and that's maybe a little bit different in how the message is being received. Interesting, right? So we're taking little cues of body language and categorizing them. What might you think about this character?
There's a sense he's a doctor.
Maybe. Why do you think he's a doctor?
Priest, that neck thing.
Yeah, maybe. Isn't that interesting? We take a little black line on our white shirt and call him a doctor. That's a category we have, and we kind of put him there.
Looks like a priest to me.
Yeah, maybe a priest. What makes
Praying like this.
interesting? Yeah, interesting. So some cues around the hands. I don't know what this photo is. I just went and found some ambiguous photo. Because it shows how many different ways we can read some kind of ambiguous. This was not clearly defined into what category it's going to go into. Which is when cognitive decision making can help us, as it turns out, is when we don't have a schema to fall back on. That's not the focus of, I want to talk about these schema and how we use these things. So, schema are the categories. Categories that live in our memory. And I'm going to come back to memory because memory is proving incredibly, vitally important in how we function on a day-to-day basis. This has only been understood in the last 10 years as neuropsychology, neuroimagery has kind of been unfolding, where we can look at people's brains or look at people's brains' functions. I'm going to come back to that one. Memory. Schema are based on memory. They're categories that we've created for ourselves. Sense-making then. Sense-making is the verb attached to these things. It's the process or the action of assembling cues and putting them in the right spots. So sense-making. So I believe our job should be teaching people sense-making, not decision-making. And I'm going to be able to prove this to you here in a second with this model. So it's about, sense-making is about assembling cues. It relies on situational awareness. It relies on interpretation. It relies on a bunch of different things that we can teach as pieces that help people assemble cues and categorize them appropriately, which by the way happens instantaneously, right? It's a very, very fast subconscious, unconscious, as in, less than milliseconds we're talking here is how this whole thing unfolds. Sense-making is the action tied to this. So, sense-making. So here's what I want to show you, a few photos, and I want you to try to objectively figure out how you make sense of these photos. Because it happens really fast. But if you spend some time practicing, you can actually get a handle on how you make sense of things. So, sense-making. Again, an ambiguous photo. Okay, so I'm going to show you a little more. So pay attention to how you make sense of these images. Okay, so you categorize this a little bit. Can anybody narrate how they just kind of made sense of this photo as it unfolded?
This is like my nightmare.
That's not how my brain works. Yeah. Anyway, yeah, how would you narrate how you understood that?
So on the first one, I saw the person's head and she's looking in a specific direction.
Yeah.
So I followed where she's going.
Yeah, right.
And then I saw those pieces of paper on the wall, and I thought, okay, that must be something important that's capturing her attention.
All right, very good. Okay, and did this confirm how you kind of categorize this image?
Well, and then my interpretation changed a little bit because I was drawn to the color of the Post-its on the wall, and then the number of them jumped out at me.
Yeah.
And so this made me think this is a person who's doing a lot of different things and just happens to be turning her attention to the pages on the wall at this instant.
All right, okay. And then how did this change your, or did it?
I saw the basket and the table, and it made me think, it just gave me deeper context. It made me think that she's in a booth at a convention.
All right.
And the basket made me think of food.
Yeah. So I agree. At this point, I think we've all, I don't want to generalize here. I have taken this, okay, it's some kind of brainstorming session, kind of trying to organize information, and this part 2 kind of confirmed for me, and then I see this like, oh, wait a minute, that doesn't really fit in my image that I was building. So I don't know, again, just an ambiguous photo. But it does change. Throwing food on a table with baskets like this didn't really fit my earlier schema. But it's not totally outrageous. I can categorize it as a trade show, as a conference workshop. I don't know, it doesn't really matter. But we've taken in more information to test our original assumptions, to test our original placement or categorization within a schema. Okay. Yeah, this is in the bad schema, right? Good, bad. How do you make sense of this photo? Okay, so that's a way to explain this photo. So when you see this photo, could you objectively understand how you made sense of this?
Yeah, I think you look for like familiar things. So there's a lot of chaos happening with the fire and stuff, but then you see the classic trip white van.
Very good.
Like, that was the first thing I saw after the fire.
All right, very good. Anybody else? Anybody else can narrate how they made sense of the photo?
It looks like there's a logo on the back left door.
Yeah.
You know, of the white van. Same thing, I agree with Drew. It's like the white van made me think of program, and then I was like, oh, there's like a decal on the back left. It's a, you know, it's an outdoor program. It's a commercial outfitter. It's like a.
Yeah. This is an interesting photo because it's 2 contrasted schemas. We can easily place this half of the photo. White van boats, got it. We can easily place this half of the photo. Got it. Fire, explosion, bad. Put them together, wow. I'm not sure which schema to put that one in because we probably don't have a schema for this, right? The driver of the van who's like standing outside freaking out has a schema now. Right, from training to failure standpoint, like they've got a new schema that they would be prepared to deal with this in the future because they've got a model and this category and something from memory to draw upon if they find themselves here again. But it's about categories. We can easily put our categories together, but it's not intuitive. Intuitively, it drops into a category, got it, move on, no cognitive effort at all. We look at this like, ooh, this is weird. Understand, oh, okay, I get it, because I had to merge my 2 categories, and now I can move on. A little bit slower, takes a little bit more effort, just draws a little bit more of our mental resources to put this together, because it's not just simply pulling on a familiar, reinforced, comfortable schema that we pull on all the time. How do you make sense of this?
I've seen it before in the Knowles, like river instructor book.
Okay.
I think I'm using past experience to inform.
All right, good.
policy.
Okay, good. So then like categorized, river rescue training, right? Like people are kind of like pulled open the right category. What exactly is going on here is not that important. And I'm actually going to come back to this photo a little bit later on. Ambiguous cues, I can more or less categorize it. I've got kind of a schema for this, but I can't explain this story, and that's okay. I'll come back there. So, schemas and sense making. So how we assemble ambiguous cues, sense making, and put it into a category predefined in our brain, schemas. We can do this, and we can help people do this, and it's important as one of the many competing motivation models. The one I'm going to present to you looks like this. So it looks like this. So anytime you have an action, motivated behavior action, and you know, I don't need to say motivated because all action is motivated. Almost all action is motivated. So if we've got some kind of action or behavior that is observed, as we work it backwards, it takes some kind of skills, knowledge, skills, and abilities, KSAs, to turn that into realization, right? So we need to be able to do something. As we go backwards from that, we have decision making and judgment. As we work upstream from decision making and judgment, we have mobilized response, which is based on authorities and patterns, and I'm going to come back to these and spend some time on that. But all this fundamentally starts with our schemas and our sense making. So how do we act? We assemble ambiguous cues, sense making, put them in the right category, right? We have schemas that are in place. Those schemas pull from memory the appropriate patterns of response that come out of there. Those patterns of response provide the fodder or the material for decision making. whether that's analytic decision-making, heuristic-based decision-making, or any of the kind of hybrid models that are out there, and then we employ our proper skills to make action happen. So, we teach decision-making. At Knowles, you teach decision-making. Without working the stuff upstream, you're missing a whole bunch of the important background context, the unconscious, instantaneous categorizations that are happening to get to decision-making. So, I think, as a business, we've all figured this out, and we've been doing this for probably 30 years. We've had a model of decision-making through skills application into action. So I think now our new frontier is to work back upstream and to kind of get to some of those deeper ideas, that the iceberg that's hidden under the water, the unconscious thought, and help people understand their own schema. We can build schema development with people and help them understand their sense-making so that decision-making flows from that. As it turns out, decision-making and judgment is highly overrated. Because it's almost always decided by the time you get there. So choosing the category more or less lays the cards on the table for what decision making is about. And now it's about choose one of these 3 cards. It's not truly deciding. It's about here's the options that have already been laid out for me unconsciously based on my history, my memory. Now just pick one of these 3 cards. Rarely is there truly a novel, unique decision being made. It's always coming from our history. So, okay, great. We can start there, but we need to know that there's more going on. So that's what my model is that I'm pitching to you, is all of this upstream material. So it looks like this. A focus on schemas and sense making, a focus on authority and patterning. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on authority here. I'll do that this afternoon in our workshop. We'll talk a little bit about authority. But pattern response based on memory is very important. And then we essentially, decision making naturally flows out from this, and we apply our skills to the point where there's lots of people who are saying don't bother with decision making. Jump from recognizing categories, and if you have a broad enough scope of categories and a broad enough base of experience, applying the skills from a model repetition, patterned response becomes useful. This is not a complete motivation model, and there's lots of holes in this, but to keep it simple from the basis of what we're talking about today, this will work just fine for us. So here's what's happening whenever we collect cues, ambiguous cues in our brain. The first thing that fires, and this is neuropsychology showing, neuroimagery showing you this. So they basically put people at a computer screen, put them, wire them all up, and then they show them images, and they just measure what's happening in their brain. So as cues come in the door, the first thing that happens is memory fires. So this is only understood in about the last 8 years as neuroimaging has become more accessible. Memory fires, and goes straight to action rehearsal. As in, here's my memory, as in, what would I do if I were to do that again? So our body is already getting primed to move before we've even broken conscious barrier here. Right? There's already a model in place to respond. And we've known this fight, flight, freeze, fight, flight, we've talked about. Now they say fight, flight, and freeze of the 3 of those. That's not a conscious reaction. So that's all unconscious, categorizing, understanding, replicating a model, and responding before anything ever breaks conscious thought out of that. As it turns out, we can practice these things, and we can help our students by practicing these things. So memory fires first. That goes to a pattern rehearsal. Next comes emotion, interestingly. And once it goes through those filters, it surfaces into conscious thought. Now this is like micro milliseconds, right? Like things firing in our brain, but that's the order they go in. So we put it in a category, we assign it an emotion, which is an important one. Emotions typically around the inhibition, as in kind of defensive, or activation, as in go for aggressive versus a defensive stance. That's the first role that emotion plays in our brains. And as it turns out, emotion colors every single cue that comes in the door. We put an emotional tag on it. Defensive, stay away from it, or activation, good, go find more of that. That's its own stream of research that we haven't put on the table in our business here at all. It's about helping people understand their emotion. Not emotion management, interpreting emotion, right? There's lots of stuff going on there. We're not talking about that there today. Once you go through those, organizing it, coming up with a pattern response, that gets all filtered into conscious thought, which is then when we can apply our heuristics, apply our rules of thumb, or we can start to do a pros and cons analytical decision making. Ian McCammon has a great decision-making article. Does that get rattled around at all? Ian McCammon related to Knowles. He's got lots of avalanche research. He has a great 3 potential models of decision-making, and he's got to put them together and how they all fit. His 3rd model, recognition prime decision-making, is essentially, that model was proposed before neuroimaging confirmed it existed, but essentially saying, do I recognize this situation? Memory, right? Do I have a category for this? Is there a schema in place? Can I replicate that? Can I do it again? As in, that's the mental rehearsal that's happening instantaneously, and then we put that into play. So psychologists kind of had a sense of that model that existed, and it wasn't until neuroimagery could prove it. So so Ian McCammon's recognition prime decision making has a lot of things in common with what I'm proposing here. That's at a simpler level, and I think what I'm going to talk about now is how we can actually drive towards building schema and helping people train sense making. So I asked you how you teach decision making. It's a cognitive process. Okay, there's limitations around that. Here's probably a more direct question. So, do we teach failure? And I think the answer is yes. In some cases, we do teach failure, but I think if we do it better is where we can start to build schema and where we can start to help people build sense making. So as it turns out, success doesn't teach things quite the way that failure does, and I think we all get that. But here's a model where we can make this work. So I'm going to talk about training to failure, which is what I kind of hang this whole thing around, and it's based on an idea of recognizing non-normal and experimenting with non-normal. Excuse me. So I made some broad generalizations here. Knowles' approach is wilderness leadership. So there's many pieces here, but let me kind of simplify this down. So building technical skill competence at a base level. Okay, so Knowles is doing, in a Knowles course, Knowles does this. Builds a base level technical skills competence. Does that through a metered progression. Right, a little more, and as you get good at that, you're offered a little more challenge. It does peer leadership, and peer leadership generally through coached experience. So you have experience. So we give our students experience, and we coach them and give them a little more challenge as that goes along. We help our students understand what is normal in the environments that we're in by showing them normal. Okay, and then we help them respond to non-normal by giving them decision-making models. So here's what a normal situation looks like. Whenever it strays away from normal, we encourage people to kick down and either rely upon heuristics or do analytic decision making to solve the new problems, to resolve the crisis, whatever that might look like. And for the record, in my mind, the crisis, and I think that's not normal. So that's the kind of standard generalized progression, or not progression, but the pieces in how this works. So here's how I'm going to propose that things could be done differently. So this was still, I think this is going to change once we look at all these other pieces, and the leadership model can be manipulated as well, although probably still rely upon coached experience. But in order to understand normal, it's better to see what non-normal is, and that's what training to failure is. In order to respond to non-normal, we need to help people with their sense making. So, and this is where I'm going to spend the rest of the half hour here, is pulling these two things out and spending a little bit more time on them. See kayak instructors in the crowd? Okay, very good. Do you do this with your students? Okay. You might as well stop. So here's what we know. Here's what we know. This drives me crazy to see these kind of photos. And in my college program, we do sea kayaking, and students can get certified and get their badge if they're level 1 sea kayak instructor. I can do a paddle float unassisted re-entry. That's awesome, and is useless when you need it. Right? Absolutely useless. So to be on a pond or in a pool and have people flip over and get back in using a paddle float has absolutely zero application in the real world. Number one is, why would you flip over on that pond to begin with? Right? There's no. And if you're ever in a situation where you would flip over, a paddle float is of no use to you anyways. So this is a part of the meter progression. Learn paddle, learn how to tilt, now tip over, learn some re-entries, now learn some assisted re-entries, and this is great, right? A nice metered progression. Here's what we know from industrial safety tells us is, by training people to do rescues on flat water, there will be no transference whenever it really gets gnarly and ugly. The schema does not apply, right? The schema is pond. And whenever you get to this, there's no transference. And there's lots and lots and lots of work around this. So how do we build people's confidence and ability to deal with non-normal? Take them where it's not normal, build the schema there, so they have a memory, at least one, a model to build upon, and they can play with that. So our history is apprenticeship-based. The outdoor adventure leadership model is apprenticeship-based. Knowles is still fulfilling that. You coach people along, slowly give people more experience, and when essentially we deem they're ready, we kind of flip from being the leader to being the, from being in front to being behind, and let them lead, and eventually they're little ducklings okay to go and fly on their own, and we set them free. So it's simple as this. 29 days of normal in a row, the logic is faulty to think that on day 30 they're prepared for non-normal. Right? Reinforcing the normal schema over and over and over and over is nice, but it's reinforcing one schema, and when something new pops up, having one defined, rich and thick schema is of no use, or very little use. So, here's what I'm proposing, is we want a lot of mailboxes, and not spend a lot of time in one of them, exposed to a whole bunch. So here's how we do this, is that we take people to the boundaries, so they can see what it's like out there, and see that it's actually no fun, and it's really difficult, and it's quite scary, and I never want to do that again, and I'm going to stay far away from that for the rest of my life. Right? Take people to the boundaries. So if we think about a metered progression is build skills outwards. So I'm not proposing accelerate the progression so that you get there quicker. I'm proposing build a couple skills, go out to the boundaries and see what's there, and then come back and build the skills that are required. Right? So it's about building different schema, which has a bunch of good developmental stuff that are out there as well, right? Problem-based learning is if I want to, after getting a beat down out here and realizing I can't save my friends, I come back to the beach and say, I got some stuff to learn. But that's totally different than me as an instructor saying, now here's what you need to learn next. Is a student coming in and saying, man, I got beat and I'm scared, I got stuff to take care of. Right? Totally different orientation around learning, plus the fact that we're building different schema to do these things. So the paddle floats are absolutely no use when you really need them. When you're out of your boat, when it's gnarly and ugly. But when you're falling off a rock face, it's not easy rock climbing when you fall off a rock face. It's the hard, steep stuff. So doing belay escapes on flat ground is of no use, right? It's like you need to do it where it's real. So non-normal. So where do we learn normal? We learn normal by seeing where the boundaries are and what's not normal, right? That's not normal. Everything else on the inside is. I get it. I'm going to keep it there because I don't like not normal. And there's a bunch of ways scaring people into understanding what the boundaries are all about. So typically the process of a skills progression, that process is typically pretty self-evident. What comes next is it's intuitive and it's kind of built in. And I don't think we need to spend as much time there. Certainly, I think spending more time on outcomes helps people get where the boundaries lie. It's like, oh, this is not what we're about here. And if you work in a program, it's easy to define those outcomes. So if you're working in Knowles, if you have outcomes around leadership, well, this is straying away from our outcomes. This is not normal. This is not good. I need to bring it back. The same would be in a skills scenario. So if we're sea kayaking with folks, this is not normal, and this is beyond the outcomes of getting a point A to B safely with minimum exposure. It's not normal. We need to change and get back to normal, as in ratchet in our exposure level here. So that applies more on a program basis and less probably whenever we're teaching generic students on a Knowles course. Training to failure though. So normal, right? Normal distribution curve. Almost everything happens here, and you think back to your days in the field, it's like they're normal. Almost all of them are normal, and your not normal days you can count on one or two hands. So those are the tails that are kind of hanging out here. Some of those tails are random events, and for the record, I don't think we can train for random events, nor do we need to train for random events. We can't even potentially imagine what all the random events are. But there are the inherent risks that are present in a sport, in any one of our activities, that are kind of here more on the shoulders of the normal curve, and that's where we should be taking folks. There's the plain old slips, lapses, and mistakes. That's fine. That we should be able to help people right through their own building understand that, but we should also help them understand what happens whenever they make mistakes. So we could spend a lot of time warning people to do it safely, or we could actually let them do it unsafely, get a smackdown over that and they'll never do it again. Right? The feedback mechanism is very different and very direct. The onus as instructors, we need to do that safely and think that through very carefully, because these are different kinds of learning activities that we're proposing that generally have a bunch more exposure attached to it too, but we just need to do it differently. So, schema. We want to have a schema all across the bottom here, not just the one heavily reinforced normal. I'm proposing we need all of them. And the more variety, the better. So that whenever those random events happen, we've got a related schema that we can maybe rely upon, because this out here is a long ways away from the middle. Having this one really thick and solid is of little use. This one is okay to put it over here, you know, and as we build a little bit of that, expand our broad range of normal, okay, that's fine. I think in many ways our days in the field just reinforce normal and don't actually help us understand what's on the boundaries of normal. So, boundaries, where are the edges? People have their own edges. You know, people experience fear at different places, but that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking really about ability to deal. So are you scared in the big waves or not? That's actually totally secondary to, do you have the skill set it takes to deal with this, to get yourself to shore or to pull your partner to shore, whatever it takes to make that happen. Once people have the boundaries, they will know when they're getting close to them. Because that's an important one. So where are the boundaries for our novice students who are building skill? Unknown. For them, there's a boundary out there somewhere. I don't know where it is. Are they going to get to that boundary under our tutelage? I'm going to tell you they need to. Because if they're not under our tutelage and they go up to the boundary, who's going to back them up? Right? So they're better to do it with us, see where the boundaries are, say, no thanks, I'll never go there again, that sucks. And back off. And next time they're getting close to the boundary, they're like, schema kicks in, ambiguous cues say, whoa, I was here before and I did not like it, and they back off. Right? So it's a different approach to where the boundaries lie. River rescue, so river is my background, and that's my whole history, and that's still where I spend my time. Fundamentally and inherently, as it turns out, I've been doing this from almost the beginning. One of the first things you teach somebody in a kayak is how to flip over and get out by themselves. Like literally, in the first 10 minutes of a whitewater kayak course, they're testing failure. So that's really important. Think about rock climbing. Are people falling in the first 10 minutes? Probably not in the standard progression. You know, they might actually climb for a long time before they ever get a real fall as a rock climber. So River Rescue does a bunch of these things. These are my college students. This is an instructor here. College student, this is the 5th day of class. Tethered hole swims. You ever tethered hole swim? Yeah, it sucks. Yeah, there's nothing fun about it whatsoever. And they come out of that hole saying, oh my God, am I in the right place? Do I need to drop out of this college program? Number one, that's my problem. But number two is, I will never get close to a hole like that again. That is really valuable, right? Day number 5, they've got a boundary on the river running, as in I stay away from holes that look like that. And that's useful. Now, we're also building skill here, right? We're reinforcing the schema so that there's actually a little bit of control there so that whenever they're in that kind of an environment, they build some comfort, some competence, but this isn't where I want them to be. In fact, the whole point here is don't go here again, right? And we put enough around there. This is a second year kayaking elective. So these are for the whitewater kayakers. Can you sense what's going on there? Yeah. We drop them off that little ledge. So that guy's in his kayak. Drop him off that little ledge. Tell him not to boof. It's like plow your nose in deep. Plow him into a log. That sucks. Right? And smashing your ribs. All your air gets blown out. And you're stuck there. You can't do anything. Like, that's the point. You can't do anything there. Don't let it happen, right? The student team is all around them. They extract this guy, which is their own kind of rescue training, right? And it's like, all right, who's next? Okay, my turn. Hang him in there. We pull them out. Folks, scout drops. They don't turn into cavalier whitewater kayakers. They turn into very cautious whitewater kayakers because they don't want to be there again. Without ever having that boundary put in front of them, they don't know what it feels like or what it's all about, and they have no way to interpret the cues that set that up, right? Blind drop, unknown, oh, I'll go for it. Or it's like, oh, I've been here before, it sucked, I'm gonna back off and see what this is about. So here's another part of our river rescue training related to the photos you saw earlier. So this is Ryan Newton, he's actually Canadian national team freestyle coach who kind of runs our kayak program in North Shore River Rescue. What's he gonna do? Wow. Now, I don't show parents this photo. What is he doing?
Foot entrapment.
It's not a foot entrapment. That's a full-on. That is lodging a paddle down the back of his Ph.D. and pinning him underwater. Why? Right? Why? Really? Not student abuse. There's actually a point to this. Why?
So he can get out of his Ph.D.
Yeah, he can get out of his Ph.D. Why? So everybody else, it's not a paddler thing. And why would you ever want to get out of your Ph.D.? The last 3 commercial river guide deaths in Canada, which has been over probably the last 6 or 7 years. One of them was exposure-based, right along swimming in cold water, drowning essentially. The other 2 were entrapment. One was a waist-worn throw belt. The rope trailed out, chalked in a rock, and they went on the back of the raft and sank. And the other one was a life jacket entrapment in a flipped raft. So 14-foot paddle raft, take the spare paddle and cam strap it around the thwart, right, so it doesn't go anywhere. Raft flipped over and somehow went through, the T-grip went through their life jacket. They're upside down under the raft, right, not in the air pocket, they're like in the water, and drowned. If that guy possibly had a model that says this is what it feels like to be pinned underwater, I've got a memory and a response that comes out of that, I would hope that they would have a greater chance of success in coming out of that than otherwise. So we spend some time with students, and oftentimes the first time, and this isn't just plain old plowing, it's like Ryan does a good job. He pushes them down for 5 seconds and brings them back up. Pushes them down for 20 seconds and brings them back up. Okay, you ready on the 3rd try? This time you're going to take off your life jacket, show them what you're going to do. It's like, right, it's all rehearsed. They've practiced this a little bit, but then they pin them underwater, so they do it. We've got a back up here where this guy's ready to help them. All right. This isn't my college program. But it does raise the question for the mountain crowd in this end of the country, how much falling do you do on your own gear? Some people, probably not very much. I had a brief, undistinguished rock climbing career, and I never fell on my own gear once. Climbed most of the classic routes in the West and never once fell on my own gear. That doesn't mean I was a great rock climber. In fact, I might have been a terrible rock climber, but I was untested, right? I don't even know what it feels like to fall, to tell you the truth, other than on a simple top rope in a gym, which isn't really falling at all. I don't know. So I don't have any schema whatsoever. So I'm not proposing you do this, but I do think if you look at this photo and get butterflies in your stomach, it's like, you've probably got some work to do to build some comfort and competence. And if you read about, the elite level climbers talk about the skills in falling, how to fall. It's like, that's nice, but whoever gets to practice that, what's the point? Why not go and practice that so when you fail, you actually have some competence and comfort at failure instead of it just being a flash and a blur and a smack in the rock at the bottom. So I think we can do this for students, maybe not at these extremes, but I think we're probably doing a disservice from snugged up top roping where falls have 0 consequences, there is no fall, to letting people actually drop 5 feet and get a butterfly and build the confidence. This is on top rope. Let people go 10 feet on a top rope, which is also training the belayer for the record, right? So thinking as a belayer all those years, did I ever catch somebody on a good fall? Never. Did I ever get yanked? Never. Some people have, but if that's by accident, that's building experience, that's a schema, and it's the ambiguous cues would collect next time. But why don't we do that for our students? Why don't we say, hey folks, we're going to take some wingers here so you feel what it's like to catch somebody, and so you feel what it's like to fall. And you might do it right.
We do that.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And you need to do that, right? That's failure. That's training people to fail. And that's where we generate safe failure instead of fail safe. Right? Where we say don't fall, never fall. This is all about we're going to learn how to climb and you're never going to fall. Instead of saying climbing and falling go together, so let's start with falling so you get that out of the way. Now you can focus on climbing and folks can build that skill that comes out of those. And we can put this in any environment. Sea kayaking would be another example where on the gnarliest days, rather than battening down the beaches, that's actually when you get out and you're going to paddle. You may not travel anywhere that day, but you actually go and build skill instead of hide from those kinds of environments. So sense making. Sense making, how we do this, sense making is about helping people understanding meaning. What do these cues mean? Instead of what do we need to decide right now? So we spend more time on cue interpretation. Situational awareness is important. Helping people understand what are the cues that go into making. What is it that's telling me I need to make a decision right now? Right? That's the more important question than what is the decision to be made right now. And we can do, that's a simple coaching technique that we can use. Questions around what's going on here. Things might be perfectly fine and normal. What's going on here? Anything of note here? We can start to assemble these cues. That's building situational awareness. I'll talk a little bit more about this afternoon. The big train wreck in New Zealand where there was a canyoneering accident that killed 6 students and a teacher. It was a failure in sense making. There were systems problems there, but fundamentally it was a failure in sense making. They did not, the guy in charge there did not have a manageable means of assembling cues that in retrospect seem pretty obvious. I'll talk about those later. This is great. This is a great example of a sense-making exercise. This is not decision-making. This is not patterned response. For the record, to draw your bear spray and shoot it, you would probably need to do that 1,000 times. I'm not sure, before it would become a patterned response where you really stop thinking about that. That's not the point, from my perspective. The point is, what's it like to have a brown thing charging at you? We can talk about it. We can sit around a campfire and talk about what to do if a bear attacks. Yeah, you know what? That's a 0, 0, 0 value. Because when a big brown thing is charging at you, you evacuate your bowels and you do whatever you're going to do. Right? There's no decision making going on there. So this is fantastic because it provides a schema. When something's charging, this is my response. Do it enough times, it's at least a place to start. Sense making. River rescue again, so if we go from slanting into strainers to actually being able to control ourselves, we call this surfing on strainers, right? So you actually hit it with, so rather than kind of swimming up and trying to get over them, which is low success rate, we're actually teaching people now to hit them with your feet, to stick, arch your back and surf and get control. And actually stay there, figure out your situation, and then swim off the sides. Right, it's changed. So the river rescue world's totally turned strainers on its head from kind of like, well, you know, too bad for you if you're stuck in the strainer. Let's swim into strainers and know how bad it is, and that's how you're going to die. Instead, actually, there's some skills that we can build here and do something about these things. So, sense making is about situational awareness. It's about patterns. It's about roles. What do I need to do here? What's my role in this kind of situation? And it's turning this into empowerment to act. And I'll spend some time this afternoon on that, about authority. Roles and authority are an important part of sense making. Knowing who you are and where you fit in the scheme of things. What's your job in this kind of scenario is an important one. If we're teaching leaders, it's simple. You're the leader, you're in charge, you need to act. And that's something we should be telling our students every day. You're the leader, you're in charge, you need to act. Right? Giving people authority. Okay, so we end up with this model. I'm proposing we start at the top end and we do that. Well, how do we build schema? We build schema and sense making by showing people what not normal is, to build more schema, give them some pattern responses and some memory, at least something to start with, to build from those things. So whenever we focus on these, it changes the tone. It changes what we do, especially in a null scenario, from a logical expedition model to actually stopping to learn key skills at the locations that will best do that. So instead of kind of dealing with crises as they arise, we generate crisis situations to practice those things. Right? So it's not about experiencing normal and we'll deal with not normal when we get there. Let's generate some not normal, create them as learning exercises, and everything else becomes normal that's in the middle of this. Because when our students go away and run their own trips with their friends, they're going to see normal a lot. 95% of the time, 99% of the time, they're going to see normal on their own. So we don't need to reinforce that. While they're with us, let's show them the boundaries, and that's where we can provide support and create engaging environments that are actually not that much more elevated as far as the risk standpoint. And there'll be real genuine learning there, which they can take out the door, hopefully never have to use, but they've got something to fall back on if they find themselves in those places. Here's the one place I haven't figured this one out. Avalanche terrain, I'm not sure what to do with this one. Abby Warner put this to me last year when we were talking about this, and I don't have enough knowledge. I'm not a snow guy, and I don't really get this environment enough to know how can we help people understand failure. So far, this is still a fail-safe environment. Don't screw this up or you die. Right, and that's really how the kind of snow world goes. And we reinforce normal, and just because it didn't slide, that tells us that I must be good, so I'll do it again tomorrow. It didn't slide, so I must be good, I'll do it again tomorrow. We don't really have a model that when it lets go, yeah, you're probably going to die. So that's a fail-safe environment where it just is not allowed to fail. It's kind of like flying a jetliner, right? It's like there's no real option for that thing to crash. It's going to fly or it's not. This is the same as snow. I'm not sure what to do with that one. Maybe somebody can come up with some models about how you can help people understand a sense of assembling ambiguous cues to get out of there before it gets bad. I'm not sure. That's not my field to know. So how do we do this? I think I've talked about these already. Critical events, talk about atypical, look at the boundaries. I'd say start with your case studies and your incident reports, which Drew will talk about here shortly. It's like this is the boundaries of what we do. And these are some of the things we should be expressing with our students and with our training staff so they understand where the boundaries are, because these things happen on our courses and therefore they're the boundaries. If it lands on an incident report form, it's by its nature not normal. Right? We don't record normal. If it lands on an IRF, it's not normal. And that's something that we could be considering turning into a training exercise and building schema around those boundaries and those things that are over there. So, what I'm pitching to you is through sense-making, non-normal, and failures, we want to teach people self-failure. We want to get away from these modes of fail-safe, as in we want to let people understand what failure means, knowing that safe people are the ones who have a little bit of fear in them, and when people stop being afraid is when they become dangerous. So we can build a model where that can still exist. There's a whole bunch, like I said, I'm doing a PhD in this stuff. I can show you 100 different things to read about it. There's a couple key ideas. Anything from Wyke. Wyke is the granddaddy of sense-making, and that's a place to start reading. You can find many of his papers on Google Scholar. It's a great place to start looking. So, there you go, folks. I'd love to hear any of your comments or any of your perspectives on what I'm pitching. Yeah?
I had a question about, so you were talking earlier about when the brain gets an input, it's memory, action, and emotion comes in there right away. So when you're pushing people to these non-normal situations and they have that fear response, how do you overcome that?
Yeah, so I don't think you're supposed to overcome that. So
how do you get people to buy into the idea that they're not too terrified to learn from this?
Yeah.
I guess is my point.
So in my experience, some people will bail early on based on the fear, and that's a small percentage of them. So let's see, in a year, my 65 first years, not every year do I have somebody drop out in that early stage, but every now and again they will. Is that person cut out to be a leader in the outdoor adventure industry? Probably they're missing some of the fundamental personal confidence to do that. And I'm perfectly okay with that. Maybe somewhere down the road they'll come back. So if we plant them early on in a high stress situation, it's number one is they have no schema whatsoever. So emotion is going to replace that. What's going to be the emotional response, positive or negative? Negative. So with their new schema, they filed away a negative response. Is that good from our perspective, that at the non-normal, high-stress situation, there's a negative response out there?
Yeah.
Definitely. So there's a lot of good stuff about having that built negatively out around the edges, and that's the feelings that will come back. It's like, ooh, ambiguous cues, doesn't feel good. Right on. That's good. Right? So that's the response that we want people to act upon. So that's a good thing. Now how do you get them over from being so scared they won't function? Well, then you need to go back and build a little bit more skill, right? So it's not a matter of zero skill boundaries. Build some skill, go to the boundaries and come back. And in that case, it might mean somebody who's sitting out. So what we've done is we've changed our progressions to be pretty customized. So we have groups of 5 doing these river rescue modules. So kind of like they rotate through these things over 4 days. Some groups are going pretty slow, and they're still swimming. While other people are doing tethered whole swims, there's other people still just swimming in rapids because they're not ready yet to bite off the big chunk. So there's still choice. You know, people still need to choose to get there legally. Aren't you just launch them into these high stress, high risk environments? They're going to choose, but I think when it gets framed, and this all gets laid out to students pretty early on, it's like, this is why we're doing it. So you see the boundaries. You're like, okay, I get this is going to suck, and I accept that. And you get some buy-in there. So if somebody's scared, that's okay. Fundamentally, that fear is useful, but I think there needs to be at least enough massaging there to get over it. I think if it's that scary, you probably are getting there too quick. Right? You might go back and put a bit more base skill together. Abby, yeah.
Has there been, or do you know of brain research on how people build their mailboxes essentially through scenarios or incident reports versus actual experience?
Yeah, direct experience is like, there's an efficacy around this. It's like 6 times more effective than I call them case studies in school. We use case studies all the time in class. Which is basically not just telling a story, but really kind of working out a story. Imagine you were there, what would you do? So trying to relive an experience. So that's considered about, so let's see if we have a scale. Reading a story is a 1. So a case study is about 3 times more effective than just reading a story, and doing it is 6 times more effective. So the value of experience is becoming so incredibly important because of that memory rehearsal. So what's missing in the case studies is there's no memory rehearsal. There's a category, it's a box being made, but it's kind of an empty box. And that's okay, it's better than no box. But there's no kind of patterned response where the body starts to prime for action. That's what a direct experience is giving us. So it's driving to what we all know here, is that experience is so valuable. And the breadth of experience is now becoming seen as so valuable. Yeah, John, did you have a question?
Same question.
Same question? Oh, good.
Just an impression that seems specifically geared towards somebody who's going to like excel in the technical aspect of what they're going to do. And I think about an old student who's non-normal, like what a subjective term non-normal is, and that their non-normal might be camping. And they're like already at that line. And so like one thing I'm like walking away from is, how do you offer that variety to the different students we encounter? And I think also, just in anecdotal, like I often ask my students, like your leader of the day today, do you want to fail, or would that shut you down? Do you want guidance so that you don't get to that place? Especially for students that have, in learning environments, like history of failure or narratives of failure, that can be really damaging.
Yeah, great.
For them. So those are just some impressions.
So here, I see here 2 there. One is, I think we kind of teach camping to people without any outdoor experience kind of on a failure basis already. Right? It's like, you're in the city, you got on a plane, now you're in the middle of nowhere, go sleep. Like, that's already a pretty wildly emergent experience. There's other ways to do that, right? We could take a tent into their gym, and we could have a camp out in their gym. You know, there is ways to progress, and we don't. So we're already probably kind of giving them an immersion experience there. Is it truly failure? No, but in that environment we don't necessarily need to. From a leadership standpoint, that's great that if you offer the people how much challenge do you want in your leadership role. I think something we could do better is, so we coach our leader, and this is tied, it's like, I could go on philosophically about this. We don't do a great job of training everybody else to be in support of that leader for that day. So we could make, if I say to my leader of the day, are you up for a challenging day today? It's like, yeah, I'm up for a challenging day. Hey, everybody else, come with me. And we plan what a challenging day is going to look like for that leader for that day. It doesn't mean we're going to sabotage them, but it does mean how cooperative are we going to be? Are we going to cover their mistakes? Are we going to point out to them on the map when are we going to help them or not? We could do a lot more to create a real challenging learning environment for our learners, which would set up failure for them. And I think we can facilitate that properly so it can be super, super positive. But we could rely upon the rest of the group to provide some of those challenges. And what does failure look like as a leader? Well, it doesn't need to be massive. It might just need to be feeling incompetent for large chunks of the day. And do you want help with that? Or are we going to let people feel incompetent longer and see where the kind of outcomes that come out of that? And there'd be a bunch of useful learning there. So what we get out of there is like, do I ever want to be there again? No. Do I need to go back and do some homework? Yes, even as a leader. So, you know what, folks? We're out of time. I'm here all day. I'm here all day. I'm talking again after lunchtime, and it's not a continuation, but there's a lot of overlap here. And certainly over between now and when that session happens, I'd love to hear your questions, and if you have any ideas you want to bounce around, I'd love to talk about this stuff. So certainly, thank you very much for your attention.